everybody, this is TCG Productions here, and today is January 1st, 2024, and the time is just after 3:15 by 3 minutes, so it's 3:18 and counting. Anyways, today I am going to be doing a detailed overview, teardown, and a little bit of a demonstration of my Dell Precision 220 workstation system. So this is a system that I got about seven or so months ago from a company which is somewhat in the local area, somewhat not. It's a fair bit of a drive to get there. But this is one of the systems, this Dell Precision 220 here is one of the systems that they had sitting in a pile of old systems that was not doing anything. And whenever I asked them about this and several other systems that we might be seeing in the somewhat distant future, and I asked if I could take it, they said, yes, please, get this out of here. And I am not kidding. If I remember correctly, they quite literally said, yes, please, get these off our hands. Take as many as you want. And so I loaded my truck up with this and a bunch of other systems, basically as many systems as would physically fit in the back of my truck. Now some of these, a lot of these I didn't get to keep because they were donations, but the older systems they let me cherry pick and keep because they were too old to do, they were really too old to have anything done with them in an academic environment because hardware and software was just so outdated that it wasn't practical to train anybody on them. And so yeah, so this system right here, whenever I originally got it, it was running Windows 2000, I think, server of some description or another. I don't think it was advanced server, and it definitely wasn't data center server. But it was Windows, I believe it was Windows 2000 server of some or another description. So, and this system also had a 3-drive RAID 5 array in it. Now, one of those drives failed, and it failed in a really oddball manner. Whenever the SCSI controller came up, and comes up during the system's power on self-test and option ROM BIOS and option ROM execution, the SCSI controller would be able to successfully scan for devices. However, it would hang whenever it came to spinning up the hard disks. And it would actually cause the controller firmware to fail to initialize with a timeout error, and none of the disks would be detected, and I was unable to access the setup program on the SCSI RAID controller's BIOS. And I did some messing around, and I found that if I disconnected the failed drive from the SCSI cable, that the controller would come up. Now, if I have the SCSI cable plugged in at all, whether it be with SCSI and power plugged in, or just SCSI but without the power plugged in, the SCSI controller would hang on initialization and fail to come up. So I actually physically removed that drive from the system, and the SCSI controller came up, and it was able to boot with 2 out of the 3 drives still intact. And I actually had to silence the alarm beeper on the SCSI controller because otherwise it would let out a beep that every county around us could hear. So, but yeah, I've just recently shut the system down, and we will start the teardown phase of this. Well, first I got to disconnect all the cabling here, and there are some very interesting things in this system that I will discuss, one of which happens to be the video card which this system is using. So just to kind of prime y'all for my upcoming, shall we say, meandering about the video card. This system was an internal DNS server within this particular company's network. And that's all I'm going to say about it because Well, because everything else is a proprietary confidential property of that company. And after I got the SCSI controller up and running, I did my due diligence and wiped the disks. Well, the 2 surviving disks. The 3rd disk can't be used anyways. At least probably not without replacing the logic board on it. And I do not know if these logic boards will just transfer over like the old CDC RIN series drives. Because I don't know if you've watched my Gateway 2000 SCSI upgrade misadventures video, but the dead hard drive that was a result of that video, well, one of the 2 dead drives that was a result of that video. The first dead drive was well and truly completely dead because of a head crash, and that drive actually got torn down on video. That was the Seagate ST, I think 41650N hard drive, or the, you know what, I've got a computer right here. Why don't I just access my YouTube channel and look at it? What a concept. So, anyways, you see, yes, ST41650N. That drive had suffered a head crash that had gone on for far too long. Kind of like some of my videos. They go on for far too long. So, yeah, the SCSI upgrade misadventures ended up having 2 dead drives. The dead Seagate ST41650N, and then there was the partially dead, and by partially dead I mean bad logic board, Seagate ST I think 41200NV drive. And the ST41200NV drives, well, that particular drive, I managed to save that by getting a donor board off of a different CDC, I think RIN 7 drive. Now the ST41650N was unofficially a CDC RIN 8 drive. However, by that time Seagate had taken control of the disk manufacturing facility, drive manufacturing from Control Data Corporation, from Control Data Corporation's disk manufacturing and storage manufacturing subdivision, Magnetic Peripherals Incorporated. Also known, I think, also later known as Imprimis. So, digression. So, anyways, I might try to see if the logic board swap will revive that drive, and if so, then I'll actually add that 3rd drive back into this system. But if not, then it will just become a permanent display piece and or shelf queen. So anyways, let's go ahead and begin our teardown here by moving this absolute chonker of a system to the side like this. And popping open the case. Now, this system is largely toolless in nature, and it is in some ways only skin deep, but in other ways it goes fairly deep. So there's a locking tab here at the back, which I'll show in greater detail, and there is a metal tab that it goes around, and that metal tab and the locking tab both have holes in them where you can attach a padlock, so that way nobody can open the system, at least non-destructively in some manner or another. Sure, you can grab some tin snips and just cut the tabs right off and get into the system anyways, but if you're trying to be non-destructive about it, that's not going to work. Of course, you could also take the lock-picking lawyer approach and either just pick it open, or in the cases of more than a few master locks, bypass it just as quick as you can, put a key in it and open it. And I'm not kidding about that either. So there's a button here on the front that actuates a metal rod, and this locking tab blocks that metal rod from moving backwards, and therefore it can't release the latches that hold the side of the case shut. So now that I've unlocked this locking tab, I can push the button and the side of the case pops out, lifts up and away. And the COA is for Windows 2000 Professional, so I guess it wasn't running Windows 2000 Server of any sort of description after all. But anyways, now we see some of the insides of the system. We have the power supply cage right here. I can press this metal tab down and lever this up out of the way. And it does actually have a sort of a kickstand type leg that will hold it up and out of the way while the case is in a vertical position. So that way you can get further into the system, such as removing the heat sinks, such as removing this air guide off of the processor heat sinks. And yeah, it's a little bit dusty, but what else do you expect from a server? And that was a really loud noise. So yeah, this is more than just skin deep as far as the toolless nature of this system goes. And we can already see that we have an intrusion switch down here. Now, if case intrusion detection is enabled and this switch gets tripped and the system clock battery is any good, it's going to set a flag in the BIOS NVRAM which requires a trip in the system setup to clear. And it will display a case has been previously opened warning every time you boot the system until you go into system setup and clear that. So, and if you don't have a password to get in, then you're not going to be able to clear that unless you probably open the case up and maybe throw a jumper switch. So yeah. Now we're going to put the system on its side here and take a bit of a closer look at things. And we can see that we have quite a bit of hardware in here. We've got our power supply, we have two processors, we have a video card. Up here you may or may not be able to see that. The VGA plug is over here. It's this blue thing that I'm pointing at. And then we have our SCSI RAID controller. And I do remember looking at what this was, but I have since forgotten. I think it was some custom LSI logic part or another. But we'll start here by removing this brace that goes across the case, and it also holds the video card in. And yes, the video card. And the video card is where things get really interesting here. Because remember, this system was an internal DNS server in that company network. And this thing has, I kid you not, an NVIDIA TNT2 card sporting 32 megabytes of video memory. Yes, that is exactly, yes, I just said exactly what you thought I just said. An NVIDIA RIVA TNT2 video card with 32 megabytes of video memory. Go ahead and disconnect the SCSI cable here. And you see there's no latches or anything on the card. I'll just go ahead and pop this thing out. And this has a full complement. This thing has a full complement of video memory here. 8 chips on this side, 8 chips on this side, 16 chips. There's our graphics processor under this heatsink. The the BIOS for the card is here. We got a power regulator, a clock crystal, a couple of capacitors. Let me see. He has some 74 series logic chip here. Wouldn't be surprised if this was some kind of a state inverter. Not sure what that is. P15C 386 3861Q. Not quite sure what that is. And then we've got a couple transistors here and a bunch of passives here nearby what is presumed to be some sort of an expansion connector here and the VGA port here. So it's a pretty clean, fairly well laid out card. And it is a card that shipped with this system because Viper V774X WS AGP 32 megabytes T3. I don't think this is a TNT3. I don't think there was a TNT3 anything ever made. Yeah, 50th week of 1999 is the date that has been silk screened onto the PCB. And if we look at this sticker down here, DPN, Dell part number, revision A00. So yes, this is the card that shipped with this system back in 2000. Why someone spec'd an NVIDIA RIVA TNT2 card in a DNS server, the world may never know. But here we are. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect and remove the SCSI controller. And this SCSI RAID controller is a very rare example of a full-length card, because full-length cards like this were not too common, especially this late into the ATX era, but they still did exist. So, and this thing really is sporting a socketed ceramic Intel i960 processor, and it's got two 72-pin SIM slots on it. Only one is populated, and it has 16 megabyte, and that is a 16 megabyte stick of RAM in there. It also has, I believe, the upgraded BBU module, the battery backup unit, and this has a Dallas DS1225AD-150 non-volatile SRAM battery-backed real-time clock. I believe it's a real-time clock. And this thing has all sorts of SCSI connectors on it. We have probably some kind of an option or feature connector here. I don't know if this is an option or feature connector or some kind of a programming connector here. It's 9 pins, so it's got 9 pins on it with one of the corner pins lopped off, so I don't think that'll be USB. Probably a serial port of some description or another. But we have two 50-pin. We've got two 50-pin connectors here. There was obviously room for a third. We've got a couple of, I think, 68 or 80-pin fast-wide SCSI 3 connectors here. There's pads on here for a third one. And then we have a couple of, I believe, LVDSE connectors here on the back. So that is a lot of SCSI on this card. Now I don't know if, and it looks like you very well could add the hardware here to drive that third fast wide connector as well as that third 50-pin connector. So maybe not, I don't know. I'm only seeing two logic ICs here. There's space for a third one. So I mean, so while this wasn't the top of the line SCSI controller available, it was very close to it. So, and of course there's our socketed i960. And yeah, that's a real ceramic processor package there. And then there is the incredibly loud piezoelectric squeaker cam. So yeah, this was very close to being the top of the line SCSI RAID controller available. If not the most top of the line controller that was available for this particular system configuration. So, and it weighs a solid, I don't know, at least a pound, 2 pounds maybe. So, next thing we're going to do is tilt the power supply cage up and out of the way. We have a sticker on it that says trimmed. Printed May 22nd, 2012, 0257. So that's quite a lot of detail as to whenever this system was assembled, or at least assembly began, starting with the power supply. And given how this was built by Trend Technologies. That would have been in Round Rock, Texas. So this system was probably built in Round Rock, Texas, and shipped up from there, which was beginning to be less and less common as companies were farming out the manufacturing of their stuff at increasingly higher and higher rates. So next thing we're going to do is we are going to remove the Intel Pentium 3 processors. So now these are dual Intel Pentium 3 processors, 733 megahertz, and as we'll see in a moment whenever I get the first of these processors out, they are based on the Coppermine architecture. Yes, right down there, CU. That is the atomic symbol. That is the atomic symbol, I believe, for copper. Now, of course, these are slot 1 processors, and they are not Xeons. So the Xeons were a much taller case and usually can only be found in slot 2 variants. Now the slot 2 variant, slot 2 processors, while on the rarer end of things, do exist. And I actually have a server that uses slot 2 processors, 4 of them to be exact, a matched set of 4 of them. It is a Dell PowerEdge 6400/900 server, and that is actually currently sitting in storage in another facility. So, but that server uses 4 Intel Pentium 3 Xeon slot 2 processors, and it probably weighs 200. It probably weighs 200 pounds completely slammed full of drives. And here is the second Coppermine Pentium 3. Both 733 megahertz, and this system has a dedicated voltage regulator module for both of those CPUs. So next thing we're going to do is go ahead and unclip the system fan and get it out of the way. So I have had this fan apart because I had to re-oil it because it sounded like it was trying to do its best impression of a lawnmower. And I am not kidding about that in the slightest. So, next thing we're going to do is go ahead and pop this voltage regulator card out of here. And do so in such a way that it will not inadvertently latch it back into its slot. Got a sticker here that says 5 volts in, and we can see a date code down there in the lower left, well, lower right actually, 17th week of 2000. We've got some passives here on the back, a couple of 8-pin ICs, 2036 0B3, and those are probably switching. These are probably controllers for the regulators here. We have a whole bevy of capacitors. I believe these are TPOs. No, these are Sanyos. Okay. That green and gold color makes me think of TPOs, but then again, this was well before the capacitor plague, and TPOs are just looking at these really crappy knockoffs of Sanyo. Couple of regulators here. I don't think these are switching components. We've got, let me see, C4, that would be a choke, and then something else on here, C4, no, L2. What is L2? L1 and L2. Those would be inductors, I believe. Looks like we've got, I don't know if that's just a smaller value capacitor or if that's some sort of a super capacitor. And of course we've got a plug here. It says Delta down here, so this is definitely a Delta Electronics part, and it is built accordingly. Whatever Looks like they were a little bit careless about not washing off the flux from where the regulators are soldered to their heat sinks. And then that leaves the next thing to take out here, being the system memory. Now this is not some really flashy. This is not really flashy looking gaming memory or anything like that. This is honest to goodness RDRAM. Yes, RAM bus. And these heat sinks, these actually serve a purpose, and these are marked as being Samsung. We have an address. We have a web address here of www.samsungsemi.com, obviously for their semiconductor manufacturing division. Warning: hot surface. They're probably not kidding about this. And it says IBM here. So these are both matching modules, 256 megabytes each, so a total of 512 megs of RDRAM. So these may be upgrade modules that got swapped in from something else, but then again, these also may be the factory modules, and Trim Technologies just happened to purchase these from Samsung or IBM or Compaq or anything of that nature. Probably not Compaq, I don't know. But there are two identical 256 megabyte sticks of RDRAM. So, and then here's the second one. A little dust bunny there. Yeah, this system actually is pretty decently fast. So I think the next thing we'll do is I'll get the power and SCSI wiring disconnected from the hard drives. Kind of clean things up a little bit and make it so that way I don't unintentionally wreck the SCSI cable. Because while I don't imagine it would be terribly expensive to replace, it would certainly be quite annoying. So I'd rather avoid that if it is at all possible. And of course we can see here the third SCSI connector that went to that failed hard drive, which is no longer in the system. It was actually sitting on an organizer shelf just a few feet away. We'll go ahead, disconnect the rest of the power cabling. The system has two optical drives. Disconnect the floppy drive cable and both power cables. Even though this looks like it has a standard ATX 24-pin power connector, here it is not a 24-pin ATX connector, and you will almost absolutely fry the heck out of everything if you try plugging in a standard ATX power supply. So next thing we'll do here in a moment is I will go ahead, disconnect the IDE cable to the optical drives. Ow. And actually remove it from the optical drives, because this is one of these really annoying cables that looks like a bear has gotten hold of it, and so it's been splayed apart in a bunch of these little individual chunks. I don't see the appeal. I don't see the appeal of this, and I can't imagine that this is doing anything for data integrity. So get that out of there for now. The floppy drive is a complete pain and a half to reconnect, so I'm not going to disconnect it. Also not going to remove the power supply for that reason, because that would involve me disconnecting the floppy drive. Then the optical drive, much to, well, not exactly to my surprise, but I'd very definitely like to see this, is actually has its onboard audio connector connected to the system's motherboard. So I'll go ahead and disconnect it here. We will be putting that back in. I think the next thing we'll do is I'll go ahead and get the front cover off the system and pull the various drives out. Now getting the front cover off of the system is pretty easy, but actually getting the hard drive cage to come out of the system is another story of its own. So that's another story of its own, because that drive cage is very firmly wedged up in there. There's a green tab on the top here. You have to push this down, and then the front panel should come loose. Took a couple of tries there, but it wasn't too difficult. And we got a green release tab here. If I push this down, it is possible to remove the floppy drive, but I'm not going to do that because it's a pain to hook back up, and I don't feel like doing that at the moment. And then we have our two optical drives. One of these is a CD rewritable drive, and then the other one is a standard CD-ROM. One of these is a standard CD-ROM drive. And it looks like both of these are factory original drives, because we have a Dell part number sticker up here at the top, and this was manufactured May of 2000, about when the computer was manufactured. And oddly enough, they have placed a more capable drive on the bottom, and is therefore connected as the slave device on that IDE channel. And again, this one is a Dell factory original drive. We have a Dell part number sticker up here, and I don't know what the date of manufacture on this drive is. It's not, label's not making it terribly obvious. And it'll tell me everything about FCC part 15 and laser radiation, but it won't actually tell me when the thing was manufactured, which is irritating. So, but given how it has a Dell part number sticker on the top of the drive, I'm going to assume that it's a factory drive. Either that or some kind of a Dell authorized upgrade. And I'll put these drives off to the side over here. I'll go ahead and correct the ordering of the drives whenever I reassemble the system. But now comes the really fun part of extracting, yes, that is the word to accurately describe, the task of removing the drive cage from the system, because someone has monkeyed with this thing in some really bad ways, and therefore it has made it extremely difficult to remove the drive cage from the system. What I usually end up having to do is pull this out just a little bit. Yeah, because, let's see, there we go. Okay, that was not a complete and total pain, which is a little bit surprising, but I am glad that it wasn't. But someone has been monkeying around with this thing pretty roughly, and has not only severely mangled these screws here. These used to be indented like it is here and here, and then there is a thing here to help hold the drive in, but no, someone has mangled that, bent this up out of the way, over here, but didn't mangle these. So yeah, there's been funny games happening here with this drive cage. So, and I don't know if that was done at the factory, or if a mildly annoyed sysadmin did that, trying to make something happen here. But everything I have been able to determine about this SCSI RAID controller, like it's got a revision A00 sticker on there, which is a telltale sign that this is a Dell factory product, or at least it was installed at the factory when the system was built, presumably around May of 2000. That's the pins there on the other side of the i960 socket. Let me see. The BBU is dated 9750, which I presume is a date code, 50th week of 1997, so that obviously sat for several years before going into this system. Either that, or this SCSI RAID controller got pulled from a different Dell system and wound up in this computer. But either way, it works. And I also don't know if the system originally started out with IDE hard drives in it. So, now there's the two drives. They are both Seagate ST19171W drives. And I believe the W, you see, ST19171W, so probably 9,171 megabytes of unformatted capacity, and supports fast wide SCSI, which would be SCSI 3, hence the connectors on the end here. So, yeah, I don't quite know what happened there, but whatever happened, happened. I've just been left to deal with it. So, that just leaves us with the empty drive cage, and it looks like you could have put a third 5 1/4 inch expansion device in here via the use of this tray, which has obviously never had anything put in it. And then go ahead and just push this cover back up. And now, with the drives out of the system, we can remove. With the drives out of the system and out of the way, we can remove the system's motherboard. Now, this motherboard is a little bit of the way this motherboard is held in is a little bit oddball. So, it's going to be a little bit challenging to show you this, I think. Yeah, we'll have to unplug this cable here leading up to the front panel. I can just tuck that back there to get it out of the way. And then we have a very good view of the motherboard. We've got some pads down here which can't be seen for what would be an ISA slot. But there is no ISA slot present in this system. And there are some empty pads for a couple of chips on here. I'm not sure what they would be for, but obviously those features were never implemented. I imagine one of them might be some sort of bridge chip to drive the ISA slot, and then another one may be where some sort of a SCSI or RAID controller might have gone, but was obviously never put there. And I don't really see any pads on the motherboard for where you would actually attach a SCSI, some sort of a SCSI cable to the motherboard. But we have 5 PCI slots. There are no PCI X slots or anything of that nature on this board. We have an AGP4X slot here. We have 2 slot 1 processor slots. We have 2 RAM bus slots here. We've got our socket here for the VRM module for our processors. We have 2 IDE connectors here. We've got our front panel connector. We have the 34-pin floppy connector, 2 power connectors, and then the 4-pin CD audio connector up here. And then we have a telephone answering device connection here. This is where you'd connect the audio output from a modem, I believe. This system does not appear to have ever been fitted with the modem, which makes sense given how this was a server. And we have a connector here, a curious connector over here that you probably can't see. We'll see if I can zoom in on it, which is labeled WUOL. And I believe that stands for Wake Up on LAN, which would be more popularly known as WOL for Wake on LAN. And this is where you would connect the Wake-on LAN connection from a network card to the motherboard, so that way the network card could actually wake the system up, and that makes sense given how this is pretty near the system south bridge. That makes sense given how this is pretty near to the system south bridge. We've got another connector over here. I don't see any silk screening. Let me see, ITP. I don't know what ITP would stand for in this case. Probably, I don't know, internal test. Not really sure. Could be some kind of a debug or testing connector of some description. So, and one connector that I almost did forget about that exists on the system board. That 3-pin connector right there behind the parallel port is for the system fan. So, but the way this motherboard is held in is there is a single screw between the uppermost processor slot as well as the IDE connectors. It's right here. You should be able to see it. And basically, to remove the motherboard is extremely simple. Once you've gotten all of the system devices out and cables cleared away, all you have to do is take that screw out, and then the entire motherboard will slide towards the front of the computer and lift out. Now you have to be careful here, make sure that all these metal clips around the motherboard release, so that way whenever you go to lift it out, you don't snap a corner of the board off. And I imagine that has probably put it into many of these boards in the past. And now we have a good look at the back of the board. Got a bunch of metal discs here. And I believe this goes here, here. Should be 12 of these discs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, there are 12 of these discs, which I believe are screw mounts, which are electrically connected to this motherboard's ground plane. So 4 of those are attachment points for these hex-headed screw mounts, which is what the processor retention screws attached to, and then the rest of these I believe are attachment points for the actual processor latches, which physically hold the processors onto the motherboard, and then of course the retention screws make sure that these processors can't back off even with these clips holding things in place. So, but yeah, that is a pretty full overview here. Now I will go one step further actually and just kind of look at some of the capacitors on here. We got some pretty big capacitors, lots of little purple capacitors scattered all over the board. And these are once again Sanyo capacitors. 820 microfarads. Yeah, Sanyo OSCON series. I don't know if I have a hope of being able to show anybody, but there's a Sanyo logo on that purple capacitor right there next to the processor slot. 820 and 4, so 820 microfarads at 4 volts. That would be 4 volts is pretty interesting. I mean, if these are filtering capacitors on a 3.3 volt DC line, that would make sense. Still, 4 volts is cutting it pretty close if it's a 3.3 volt line. Big old inductor here, inductor or choke here right there. 1 microhenry inductor or choke there. System north, got the system north bridge. More capacitors and some much bigger capacitors. 3900 microfarad at 6.3. So 6.3 is standard. 6.3 volts is standard. 3900 microfarads isn't as standard. You usually see 3300. Usually see 3300 in those places. but I imagine that these are big filtering capacitors for the 5-volt rail, because we got one here, we got one here, got another one here, 3 of them right here next to the VRM socket, another one here next to the memory slots. So there's probably a voltage rail. So given how there's one here, there's one here, and there's one here, so maybe these feed devices up here, feed the processor slots. Got one here, probably we got 2 here and 3 here, another one there. So this one probably feeds these, or it's coming down from the power. I don't know, hard to say. But I'm going to go ahead and put the motherboard back into the case. Again, you kind of got to be careful here, make sure you don't snap a corner of the board off somewhere. Got to make sure that all of these little metal tabs seat back into the slots on the board. Might have to push them down and literally poke and prod it a bit with your fingers, so that way it'll get the point. And then you just push it back in, and it latches, and it doesn't really latch into place, it locks into place, and now you cannot pull the board out because those metal tabs are hooks that grab a hold of the board whenever you push it in like this. Now you can reinstall the single retention screw and go about your way at putting the system back together again. So, but I think some of you might find that pretty interesting, and so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to reassemble the system on camera. So, and I'll generally put things back in the order in which they came out. So, open that back up. Put our hard drive cage back into the system. Make sure it's going back in there the correct way. Does appear to be. Push that most of the way back in. Get these tabs lined up correctly. There we go. Now, just a matter of pushing or pulling the drive cage into the system. Hoping this doesn't snap back and pinch your fingers off between the drive cage and the front cover, this front panel here, which is hinged. And I gotta do some finger gymnastics here to get these metal tabs around their holes. So that way they will go back through the appropriate holes in this front cover. There's that one. The other one is refusing to comply. I might have to employ the use of a screwdriver. That one. There we go. So that cover should be securely latched into place now. And now I can go ahead and slide the optical drives back in. I'm going to put the less capable one on the bottom here, and the more capable one on top. I'll just slide back in and click into place there. And I think we're done here with the front panel. So I'll go ahead and put this back into place. A couple of plastic hinges down there. This just levers up and clicks in quite nicely. Make sure I can hit all the buttons. Nothing's obviously wrong. We're good there. And since the floppy drive cable is presenting itself, we'll go ahead and plug that back in. On this cable I have to worry about flying around, losing the system, and potentially getting amputated. We're having a hole punched in it, much to my annoyance. Well, I do have spare floppy cables. They're difficult to dig up, and I'd rather not. So now I'll bump the tripod and while trying to adjust the system. And I'll go ahead and take our voltage regulator module. Make sure that the slot tabs are open. And go ahead and click this thing back down into place. Go ahead and take our system memory and reinstall it. Labels face towards the top of the case. There we go. Yes, I'm not exactly going in the same order I removed the cabling in, but go ahead and connect our CD audio cable up. I'm going to connect it to the top drive here. I don't know if I want to connect it to the top or the bottom drive. I'll connect it to the bottom drive, given how that's only a CD reader. So I'll probably only use it for playing CDs, while the top drive will be used for burning and whatnot. It does not matter what order the processors go back into the system in. They're both the same stepping. So the system doesn't really care as long as you put the correct, just as long as you put two identical processors back in place. I'll go ahead and reinstall the system fan. Oddly enough, this pushes up into place, unlike the later Dell Dimension systems where it pushes down into place relative to the top of the case rather than the side. So I'll go ahead and click the processors back in. Line the heat sinks up with the tabs and the metal and the plastic clips. Here we go. Sounds a little bit crunch-tastic, but that's just how things are. Slide this back into place and click. Go ahead and get our 4 retention screws here. These are a little bit awkward to screw back into place, but it is doable. And you have to take these out to get the processors out, because these actually form a sandwich between itself, the heatsink, and the retention screw mounts on the motherboard. So now the next thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and plug the IDE drives back in. Then plug the cable into the motherboard using the second IDE channel. Usually the first IDE channel is reserved. Usually the first IDE channel is for hard disks, and the second IDE channel is for accessory devices. At least that's how I've always done it. Go ahead and put the processor heatsink, processor air guide back in. This just kind of press fits into place. There's some hooks on the there's some hooks here, here, and here that interface with the fins on the heat sinks to kind of grab onto the processors and hold the air guide in place. Now I'll go ahead and put the SCSI cabling back in. This is always a bit of a fun trick, in air quotes obviously, because one of these drives is upside down. And while we're in here, I'm going to go ahead and plug the power cabling back in. Make sure that we're not offset by a pin here, which would fry the motherboard. Of course, it's unless you're equipped with the mallet, a hammer, unless you're equipped with some sort of a mallet or hammer, you can't plug the 24-pin connector in backwards. Plug the optical drives back in, and I got to plug the SCSI drive power in one at a time. There's one of these is unused because there's no third drive. Either there's no third SCSI drive and there's no third 5 1/4 inch expansion drive. So we'll plug the power in on the second SCSI drive. I'll plug the data cable, the SCSI cable in on the first SCSI drive. And I'll kind of intertwine this cabling and plug in the first SCSI drive's power. I'll leave that cable dangling in place for now. Go ahead and put the SCSI controller back in. This is always putting the SCSI controller back in is always a little bit annoying to do, but it is doable. Might take me a couple tries to make it happen, but it does eventually happen. And now, go ahead and plug the SCSI cable back into its channel connector here on the SCSI controller card. There we go. Now, I'll go ahead and put the video card back in. And there's no latches or anything, so the card just seats into place. I'll go ahead and put the retention screw back in for the SCSI controller. That would have been bad. Oh, that's annoying. And then this cable here on the SCSI controller, this connects to an auxiliary LED header on the motherboard. And what that does is whenever there's disk activity on the SCSI controller, it will actually cause the hard disk light on the front panel to flash accordingly. So, that back in position and realize that I have it backwards. Put this back in here. And you know what? That's not really a great thing to do. I'll need to unplug this SCSI connector. And plug it back in once I've got this thing in place. Plug it in. Grab the retention screw and get it on the screwdriver ready to put in. And there we go. And basically what that retention bracket does, it has a spring-loaded arm that presses against the graphics card and keeps it in place. So there's a piece of trash wedged up between a couple of the pins and the connector. There we go. That goes in. Power supply goes back in. Clicks into place. And now we can stand the system back up, get the side of the case back on, hook it up, and fire it up. Hopefully not literally. So, and if you are wondering, yes, this is the same Dell. This is the same model workstation that UXW Bill featured in one of his multiprocessor computing fun videos. Lock the retention tab. And go and cable this thing back up. There we go, third try's a charm. Fan sounds like a lawnmower. Go ahead and enter setup here. Camera off the tripod for now. That fan will quiet down eventually. And now it's going to scan the SCSI channels and spin up all available drives, and the sound these drives make is pretty cool. Now we should boot up. Should finish post. You're gonna get a warning about the system cover having been previously removed. There it is. And now we're in setup. So I will go ahead and take this opportunity to adjust the white balance. I think the focus is good, so I'll just lock it to almost where it is. There we go. So, the system time is about 6 minutes slow, but that'll be corrected once Windows 2000 boots up. The data does have a 3.5-inch floppy drive. There is no B drive. There's no zip drives in this system. Primary drives 0 and 1 are off because there's nothing connected there. It has correctly detected the CD-ROM drives. System BIOS boot devices, that is correct. And that is saying is it's going to get 512 megabytes of ECC RDRAM, 266 megahertz. And there we go, ECC RDRAM at that. Something I forgot to mention. Second processor is enabled. And they're both processor IDs are 683, 256K of cache, 733 megahertz. Got a whole bevy of integrated devices here. USB emulation is off. I've got the parallel port set to PS2 mode. Put it on ECP mode for all in the world that'll make. IDE drive interface, auto or off. Diskette interface is auto, read only or off. I'll leave that on. PC speaker is on. Primary video controller is AGP. DAC snoop is off. PCI IRQ assignment. Wow, it actually identifies the real devices. So the USB controller and the multimedia controller, whichever one that is sharing IRQ11. The network card and the SCSI controller are sharing IRQ10. And chassis intrusion detected. This is where you got to clear that. So you can hit enabled, enabled silent, which will not warn upon detecting chassis intrusion, or you can disable it. I'll disable that for now. And then, of course, CPU serial number, which is a way for the processors to report their serial numbers to software. That defaults to disabled after a bit of a privacy kerfuffle that resulted as of that. So keyboard numlock is on, reporting keyboard errors, automatic power on is disabled, no remote wake up, covers from the last known power state, no asset tag is set, saving and exiting. System will reset. And you'll notice that when the system comes back up, it will, the SCSI controller initialization will be much faster, because it's not having to spin up its own drives again. And I'm not going to take a trip through the SCSI controller, the SCSI controller's BIOS, because that will be that's its own rabbit hole. You can easily blow an hour of video over there. Yeah, DRAM size 16 megabytes. It hangs around here for a bit before Windows 2000 starts up. There we go. And the system fan has quieted down considerably. There we go, Windows 2000 is starting up. Of course, it says built on NT. Of course, it says built on NT technology. Here's a fun fact: Windows 2000 was originally going to be called Windows NT 5, but at some point they changed the name. There we go. Video adapter just come up. In a fully graphical mode, turn the speakers on. I will need to type a password. Boot up time was fairly reasonable. Actually, on the faster end of things, it says it found a CD-ROM drive. So, yeah, I don't have much in the way of programs on here. For whatever reason, the background setting doesn't like to stick, so I have to set it every time I boot the system. Picture of the tech room from a couple years ago. Look at our system properties. Head over to the device manager. Oh, that's right, I need to log on as a local administrator to change stuff. Actually, I don't need to be looking there. I need to be looking in the IDE controller settings. IDE channel settings, okay. And I do have Ultra DMA turned on, as you might be able to see. Both drives are running in Ultra DMA mode, which is quite nice. So I don't happen to have an audio CD at hand to play with, so just cancel out of that. We go into screensaver settings. This is where the 3D adapter's capabilities really start to shine. Just for grins, we'll turn the resolution all the way up and hit preview. And this is a very well-equipped video adapter for the year 2000. I did some looking on it. MSRP was about $300, and I imagine that through Dell, the Dell price would have been about $500. So imagine $500 in the year 2000 for a very high performance graphics card, only for it to go into a DNS server that probably only displayed a Windows logon box for 99% of the time the system operated. Yeah, it baffles my mind how that happened. I mean, it's almost like this system was supposed to be some kind of a daily use high performance workstation system, but it just ended up being a lowly DNS server. And I've got a Dell Optiplex GX1 system also in storage with an Intel Celeron processor. I don't think it's a 400A. I think it's a 533 megahertz part, and a really basic IDE hard drive. That was also an internal DNS server for the company, and I imagine that it did the job just as well as this thing did, and cost far less money too. So this is a pretty fast 3D. This is a pretty fast 3D adapter for its time, and it's driving a 1280 by 1024 display, and doing so quite well at 60 Hertz. So let's look at our display settings here. True color, 32-bit, 1280 by 1024. NVIDIA RIVA TNT2 with 32 megabytes. Oh, we could run the monitor at 75 Hertz. Let's see if that will happen. Monitor has to auto adjust, but it does manage to make it happen. Let's see if the screensaver will run at 75 Hertz. It's looking like it's managing it pretty well. I'm getting tired of staring at screensavers. Let's do something else. Programs, accessories, games, pinball. And Explorer froze. Turn that down a little bit, because the audio from this game is kind of loud. I wonder if YouTube will pick up on the fact that I'm playing pinball. And I'm playing pinball on Windows 2000. This version is a little bit different than the version you see on Windows XP, in the fact that you have much less freedom in the key binding options. Oh crap. Yeah, it looks like this is going to be a pretty short game. Redeploy. Yeah, that was a short game. High score, it says. Yeah, it's a reasonably fast 3D adapter. A actually pretty fast system. So let me see. 1632 the clock says. So and I'm not going to bother logging on as the local admin just to update the clock time. But what I will do is I will shut this system down, and with that, this is the end of the video. This is TCG Productions. Peace out, guys. Peace out, and I will see y'all in the next one. Okay, well that wasn't the actual end of the video. This will be the actual end of the video. Here's some close-up audio of the system shutting down. Go ahead and fire it up. And I just realized that I did not connect the front panel back to the motherboard.